and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this last session of the show and the last day of the show. I hope you've enjoyed your time, and really I hope you use the time after the panel and before the panel as a time to reach out to our experts and talk to them and ask them the individual questions that you may have as well. Today's session is entitled Small Cell Backhaul, and I would really like to thank our sponsor for the session, Advantage Engineers. Advantage Engineers provides expert consulting and engineering services for the wireless communications industry throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. Employing over 150 engineers, project managers, site acquisition specialists, technicians, and scientists, its network deployment services include program planning, network assets, engineering, real estate, regulatory support, and project and construction management. In addition to A&E services, Advantage Engineers also provides in-house comprehensive environmental due diligence services. And I think with the advent of small cells, we're going to need, if you were in this last session at all of those are components as we try to figure out how to co-locate or locate power and provide backhaul to these small cells. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Ronald Mudry. Ronald is going to moderate this session. He is president of Tower Cloud, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to start by introducing our panel, and then I'm going to show a couple of slides just to set up our session on small cell and an emphasis on backhaul and other aspects. And then we'll move into some panel questions, and we'll start off with a couple questions for each of the panelists, and then we'd really like to try to open it up to the audience and get as much participation and take the session in whatever direction you guys would like, so we can keep it free-flowing. So let me start with, on the far side is Francis Audet, and he's with EXFO. And EXFO is a company that makes testing and monitoring equipment, is involved in that element of the industry. And Francis has been in the industry for about 15 years. He's always worked in the fiber optic side, the optical side. He's got experience on long-haul routes, including some undersea cable routes and so forth, and was involved for about 12 years in managing the product line for those sorts of systems. About 3 years ago, he moved up to the CTO's office and has been there since. So Francis, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next to him is Greg Ortyl, and Greg is one of the co-founders of PEG Bandwidth, and PEG Bandwidth is, I'd say, one of the leaders in bringing fiber backhaul out to the macro cell sites, and like everyone that's in that business, they're looking very hard at the small cell sector, and we'll hear about that as well. Learning about Greg's background, I find out that really he's been in backhaul as long as backhaul has been around, since it began to move off of the ILECs. He started as one of the early sales leads at Fiber Tower. He was national account director there. Moved on to Level 3, where he was vice president and also a director prior to that in Level 3's wireless backhaul space, and then was a co-founder of PEG Bandwidth, which started in 2009. So Greg, welcome.
Thank you.
And lastly, but closest to me here, is Wayne Davidson. Wayne's the Director of Technology Solutions for Nexius, and Nexius is involved in really almost all aspects of the design, strategy, and deployment of LTE networks. So they're working very closely with all the wireless carriers on their strategies, and obviously moving into the small cell side with that. He's been with Nexius since 2010, and prior to that had a nice long career with Alcatel-Lucent. So I think we've got a very experienced panel that come from different parts of the industry. So we'll see what they have to say. My company is Tower Cloud is also in the wireless backhaul space. Much like PEG, we build fiber to the cell sites and operate in the southeast of the United States. So with that, I'll go ahead and get us started. So we've seen a lot of demand forecasts, and this is another one by IGR, Ian Gilliatt's company that specializes in the mobile research. And basically, much like Cisco and others, people just see mobile bandwidth exploding. This particular forecast is showing it to grow basically about 10x in the next 5 years. Obviously what that's doing is, driving a lot of hot spots. And, all these devices that are out there, the 4G devices, are beginning to really cause spikes within the macro. So if you think about those white circles there as the coverage range of the macro, those are good for covering the city broadly, but then the 4G devices tend to work in certain locations. They're not necessarily moving around while they're downloading video, hopefully not driving while they're watching it. And so that causes these spikes that are just in certain parts of the city, and they're happening at different times. And this is really the challenge for the wireless carriers, with these spikes happening, and they're having to manage, peak capacity to make sure that users have a good experience. They've got to determine how they offload some of that capacity from the macro to serve it. And the other problem, of course, is that traffic changes throughout the day. And what this chart shows are these little peaks here that happen throughout the day. And it used to be, and it currently is, that you see these peaks happening kind of in the morning. You see the little bubbles there by 8 a.m., around noontime, and then, after work. And with the 4G devices that are coming online and the amount of bandwidth that they're gobbling up, not only are these spikes, much higher, but they're happening now at different times in different parts of the city. And this is really the challenge that the carriers are now looking at, is to, no longer is it just coverage and general capacity within the market, but you got to have the capacity where you need it, when you need it. And that's really what they're trying to solve for as they're beginning to look at the small cell deployments. So with that, wanted to go ahead and move into some Q&A. And I think before we drive into the small cell discussion, which is where we'll spend most of the time, I thought we'd start with the macro cell site backhaul and what's sort of happening with some of the things there. So before we go, to the small cell, Greg, could you sort of comment on what you guys are seeing in terms of both bandwidth growth and macro cell site growth, new tower growth in your space?
Sure. Thanks, Ron. First of all, I'm curious, out of our audience here, how many of you are in, would you say, like an engineering services type of firm? Just a show of hands. Wow, that's quite a bit, okay. How about hardware? Anybody in the hardware space? A couple hardware? Any wireless carriers? Crickets. And anybody providing backhaul? Anybody else providing backhaul? Quite a few of you guys. Okay. Cool. Just curious. Got some audience participation there.
Very good.
So macro backhaul activity. So this is a space that, as Ron said, I've been involved in basically my entire career, and it's really the foundation on what PEG Bandwidth was founded on. We started to provide macro backhaul for sites typically in lower tier and rural markets. And it's funny, I kind of equate what we're going through now is the land grab 2.0, because if you go back to 08 and 09 on the heels of the 700 meg and AWS auctions and Verizon really leading the charge to get fiber, wanting fiber to towers, there was this land grab of backhaul providers, and we were certainly one of them that participated. And had you told me back then that in 5 years we would be doing it all again, except instead of lit Ethernet, that our customers would be looking for dark fiber to every tower, I would have told you were crazy. And I probably wouldn't have gotten an investment from my private equity group that initially funded our business. But that's what's happening. So we are seeing a slowdown in awards on the lit Ethernet side of the house. So Verizon's virtually awarded, all of their sites. Obviously, new sites that get built need backhaul. So we're seeing that, 10 to 20% organic growth in markets where we have a majority of the macro backhaul. But what we're seeing is a trend, particularly at this point in tier 1 markets of Verizon going after dark fiber to their towers in tier 1 markets. It's interesting to see. Ron and I have talked about this. We're not sure how long the capital is going to be there to help subsidize these builds. So my hypothesis is that this will stop in Tier 1 markets and not really go out into the Tier 2 and 3 markets where we have built a lot of fiber. But certainly we've seen a slowdown on the lit Ethernet side. By virtue of where PEG is, again, rural, lower tier markets, we are still seeing sites that others have said they can hit. Comcast, some of the larger ILECs have said, yes, we can hit these to one of our customers a year and a half ago, and they've just now realized, oh crud, we don't have that $150,000 in the budget to build out to that tower. So they've returned the site back to a Sprint or an AT&T, and they've come to us. So we kind of handle the sites that no one else wants, the rural sites, the challenging sites. We like to call them mountaintops and prairies. So we're still seeing a little trickling in of the prairies and mountaintops, and a big push toward dark fiber to the tower.
Thank you, Greg. And I'll just comment on that as well from our side. We operate in a large market like Atlanta as well as some rural markets. And again, we've also seen the growth in the number of new cell sites that are coming online, after that initial land grab that Greg talked about has really increased. And really you see AT&T and Verizon leading the way with densifying their networks and kind of really increasing the new macros that are coming on. The thing I found was interesting is that the plan also includes not just big cities, but it does include some of the rural areas to fill out some of the coverage, if you will, as they begin to roll to VoLTE, voice over LTE. The handoff at the edge, is not as clean with LTE as it was with CDMA as an example. So I think we'll see more macro towers for bandwidth reasons or capacity reasons, but we'll also see some for coverage in the smaller markets as well. So it's a good time from a backhaul perspective. So let's move on to the small cell space. And I've been actually doing some of these small cell panels like this, for over 3 years at various different conferences. I mean, it's been all the hype. Everything that you see is small cell is just going to explode. And we haven't, in the past seen any deployments. And I guess Wayne, from your guys' perspective, being involved in what you're involved in with the carriers, are you seeing actual deployments by carriers of small cells, or are they still planning? And if they are going forward, what kind of solutions are they trying to solve up front, and what kind of backhaul do they favor for the small cells?
Well, I think if you're from the outside looking in, you may not have seen a lot of progress yet. But if you look at, I think they've moved from the planning to the implementation stage now. So I think you're going to see thousands and thousands of small cells come on air probably in 2015 because of this era. In order to do small cell deployments, you can't just decide, wake up one morning and say, I'm going to turn on a small cell. There's a lot of planning that has to take place in terms of who your partner's going to be, what are you going to use for backhaul, how are you going to get your zoning, et cetera. So I think there's been a lot of planning and putting things in place, and then now I think it's in the infrastructure building stage or the infrastructure stage. And I think at least the large operators I think are going to roll out thousands of them in 2015. I see tens of thousands maybe at least by the end of, well, not tens of thousands, but probably anywhere between 10 to 20,000 in 2015 based on the rate that things are going. But with that said, we have in our company the traditional old timers when it comes to deployment installation. And one of the guys said to me, "Is this real? Is it really real this time?" And I think in some ways I'm skeptical that the business model's been proven out to get to the really large numbers. But on the other hand, when you look at the traffic, it has to happen. It has to happen. We have to figure a way to get out tens of thousands or 50,000s or hundreds of thousands of small cells to meet the capacity. So the question is, when is it, how is it going to happen, and who's going to be the innovators that can create some of the solutions that actually break the model or make the model work? So I think the key is going to be in the next 2 years as they deploy enough volume of them to learn the business case, understand the business case, the deployment complexities. Then the next stage is going to be the innovation where people are going to take and figure out how to do things better. And then we're going to have the real hockey stick. That's kind of my belief.
Good. So you're saying then that you're seeing actual deployments taking place now, but you expect them to ramp to this 10 to 20,000?
I think I would say deployments, when you say deployment, you're saying on air, I think it's 2015. I think right now they're in the build stage, in the 6 to 12 months to get the fiber in, to get the backhaul laid to get the, the equipment installed, antennas installed, and then they're going to start turning them on next year.
Okay, good. Greg, what are you guys seeing in your markets?
So if you go back 14 months ago, there was a barrage of RFPs that we responded to. And as we found out a few months later, that was more of an RFI just to see who was going to play in the space, what kind of budget, how far away from the carrier's budget was pricing. But then by late last year, we started to see what I would call more real activity. And we've seen awards take place on limited deployments in both Tier 1 as well as lower tier markets, believe it or not. What I haven't seen, though, at least in our shop, is an actual deployment of the small cells. So that leads me to believe that there are still some business model issues that are in debate, if you will, behind the doors at the wireless carriers. But there are awards taking place. I mean, we're having very hardcore design sessions with the wireless carriers, engineers, RF engineers, real estate teams, with specific structures identified. And we've been notified that we've lost some deals. We've been notified that we've won some deals. But there has been, to my knowledge anyway, and I know FiberTech, for instance, sent out a press release a few months back talking about their success in Ohio with a small cell. So I'm sure there are deployments going. You walk around the halls, you'll hear about pockets of deployments here and there. But I agree with Wayne that most of the deployments are really going to kick off late this year into next year. I was talking with a customer of mine recently who runs a large area for a Tier 1 provider where they have 15,000 towers. And he said that this year there's a limited goal of on-air small cells in the hundreds, 100 per one of his regions. Next year it's 700 per region. You've probably heard these numbers, Ron. But he said by the end of 2017 he's anticipating that their target's going to be 15,000 on-air small cells in just the southern United States. And what was interesting is he pointed out that since 1983 or what have you until now, they've built 15,000 macro sites, and now they're going to be tasked with turning up 15,000 additional sites just in the next 3 years, 3.5 years. So it's truly a monumental hurdle coming our way. But I would agree that the hype, I'm with you. I've been listening to all your panels for the last 3 years, and I agree the hype is still outweighing the reality to a degree, but I think that switch is going to flip here by the end of the year.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And, when people talk about small cells, they talk about a lot of different things. Obviously DAS has been going on for a long time, and there's femtocells and this and that. I mean, I think the emphasis that we're talking about are the 4G metro cells and the next wave of small cell that's coming. So we'll get more into the small cell and the challenges of these deployments and the business model in a few minutes. But before we go there, let's turn over to Francis here for a moment, because what we have heard is a lot about fiber. And we're in the wireless business here, but once the traffic gets to the tower, it pretty much moves on to fiber immediately, and that's the heart of the network. We just heard Greg talk about one of the major carriers looking at going with dark fiber to the macro cell sites. And obviously dark fiber is one of the solutions for backhaul for small cell. So with all this fiber out there, Francis, it seems that the wireless carriers are now taking on a new role. And they're, instead of having folks like us manage the fiber, they may be managing some of this fiber themselves. Can you comment on, the tools, the management, the training that perhaps the wireless carriers may need and how you guys address that?
Yeah, certainly can. Thank you very much, Ron. Yeah, this is the wireless infrastructure show, and I'm obviously a wireline expert, so it's not always a normal and natural match, but as we say, there's no wireless without wireline. An example that I often use is the PISA tower. We all know the PISA tower. It took a couple of 100 years to build, actually, and once it was done, it was supposed to be a flagship and a fantastic monument, and what happened? We all know the foundation was not strong enough, and luckily for them, it just leaned a little bit. It didn't fall. It could have been much worse. Now, the wireless network that we are building, that you guys are building, and that the world requires and the world needs, sits on a foundation, which is the fiber optic foundation. And hopefully, the wireless operators that are doing more and more of this wireline now will not let PISA tower come into their network. The foundation needs to be strong and needs to be reliable. For several reasons. Obviously, they want the quality of experience, they want the quality of service, they want lower churn, and all that depends on the quality of the signal and therefore the bandwidth that gets to the towers and to the cells. So fiber is really the foundation, it's the highway bringing the data there, and in order to reduce the truck rolls, to reduce the OpEx and the maintenance costs, well, good fiber maintenance and installation and test and measurement procedures are required. And this is regardless if you're a wireless operator that own your fiber or lease it, or you're a neutral host that has fiber, for example, in a DAS that is used by multiple carriers, which is a true possibility. You need a squeaky clean fiber. And there's really two main issues in the fiber optic today that can go wrong. I've been working for the past 15 years with the telecom industry and in the long hauls and the submarines, and it's pretty much the same thing happening today in the backhaul. 80% of the network issues, the wireline network issues, come from connector cleanliness. So regardless of the quality of your antennas and your towers and your builds and all that, a lot of your issues will come from a little speck of dust in the core of your fiber, just between two connectors, between the head end and the equipment and the fiber, between the two fibers at the patch panel, between at the E node B, at the top of the fiber, at the RF. Anywhere a little speck of fiber of dust, approximately 80% of the network failures come from there. And historically, again, the wireless folks and operators are obviously experts in wireless. They're not necessarily experts in fiber. Coax has been there before, DSL in some part. So checking the connections when it's copper-based has never really been an issue. When it's fiber-based, again, there's still dust can create insertion loss, can create return loss, can create a bunch of issues that can just totally destroy the signal integrity. So what these carriers need to do more and more is adopt best practices into testing the fiber optics, testing the cleanliness of the connectors before connecting them. Even though some are just open and click, and there's always potential static and danger of attracting dust there, so it's a good practice. And then once that is done, checking the link integrity for bending of the fiber. When it's going up the tower, it may be bent, it may be somebody has stepped on it, twisted or stapled on the wall. We see that sometimes. So all these little microbands and macrobands can create loss. Loss means less signal, less power, and eventually less good quality of the signal. So that's in a nutshell what the wireless industry and the wireless operators need to be wary of, is that wireless does not come without the wireline part. And the wireline part, it's basic maybe, but there are some best practices to make sure that it's squeaky clean and it works up to the level of service that you want to shoot up the tower. Now this is even more true with the eventually 5G, but just today the LTE Advanced, we've got gigabits of information going up and down the tower. So that's more and more bandwidth up that same fiber that was maybe put a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, which was not expected to carry that much bandwidth. So just like we've seen today in the data center in the telecom world, there's lots of fiber historically that were there that cannot be used anymore or that needs to be retested, recharacterized. So might as well do it right the first time. Characterize your fiber and make sure that it's good for today's services, but for tomorrow's services as well.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Francis. We'll come back to some questions on that in a moment as well. Before I go to the audience, I just wanted to ask one more question about the deployment challenges for the small cells. You talked about the need to plan and organize. You can't just flip the switch and do this sort of volume. You've also commented a little bit about the business model aspect. What are some of the deployment challenges, that the carriers are facing and trying to solve that are going to, either slow down or prohibit some of this deployment, or that people need to figure out in order to make it go? Greg, do you want to start, and then we can go to Wayne?
Sure. So I alluded to this in the first question, but I think the business model is the biggest challenge, far and away. We all kind of laugh at this comment, but I literally had a customer a year ago tell me that small cell means small price, and they didn't laugh when they told me that. I belly laughed. It was because I think we all in this room understand the complexity of site acquisition and backhaul, especially in dense urban markets. It's not a small price. But I think that the carriers, I think, need to look at us in the backhaul community and really in the entire infrastructure community more as partners. This can't devolve into a typical customer-vendor type relationship where we're getting beat up on pricing. I want to see the wireless carriers really look at this as a partnership, long-term partnership, so that we can actually finance what they're trying to do. You talk about 15,000 small cells in 25% of the country in the next 3.5 years, times the other 75% of the country, times 3 or 4 carriers. You're talking about a lot of resources required to deploy this network. They can't do it themselves. They don't have the resources, their day jobs, keeping enough of their time. But if they look at this as in a long-term partnership fashion, where they realize that we're spending a lot of capital up front to help solve some of their toughest capacity challenges, the business model has a better chance of working, I'll say. But the complexity of deploying, I would say, is the second biggest challenge. We've looked at these small cell RFPs, and in some cases you're dealing with literally several different municipalities, several different utility companies, an Indian reservation or two, and just the sheer complexity of negotiating access rights across all of those asset owners is mind-boggling, and I think that, and again, it's part of the reason why we need the carriers to be a partner with us, understand those complexities and those challenges with negotiating with an Indian reservation. You're not going to turn up a small cell in 90 days. Give us some time and work as a partner. Help, have an AT&T call somebody will help deploy a project quicker. Not getting on a project call on a weekly basis and saying, where's the site, where's the site, where's the site? So I think, between the business model, which I think still has some room to go, I think the carriers need to become a little more realistic with, I think I had a friend put it well yesterday, is the gap between what the carriers want from a capital perspective, an upfront charge, and what it actually costs to do it from a vendor perspective is a wide gap right now. And I think over time we'll get there, but they really need to look at this long term so that we can invest our capital knowing that these sites are going to be there for a long time.
Okay, good. Thanks, Greg. Wayne?
So I've been in the wireless industry for, 24 years now, at least. Yeah, so at least that. So it's interesting to me. I really agree with your statements about it's a lot, when you move into small cells, you've shifted the problem from wireless to wireline. I mean, if you really look at the sticky, difficult issues with small cell deployments, they're more wireline issues. They're companies that have the ability to really understand their labor costs, deal with logistics, deal with zoning, and those sorts of things are going to be at a big advantage over companies who just know how to put up a tower and radiate. So I think, so I say one of the biggest challenges, I think one of the biggest issues is going to be learning how to shift the focus from let's do the RF coverage to let's figure out the logistics of getting the wireline or the fiber access. I think that's one of the biggest issues. Another issue that I see, though, has to do with just if you look at small cells and from the radio perspective, you need to ensure it has a very limited radius. You force the vendors to get smaller and smaller cells so that you can put them anywhere. Therefore, their power output's low, so they can cover only a very small area. And And also, you're using the same spectrum that you're using in the macro. So now the second biggest challenge I think is, where do you put that small cell? You have to put it in just the right place so that it doesn't interfere with the macro, because it's the same spectrum, and at the same time serves the maximum number of subscribers to get to the business case issue, which is, I don't want to go and I can't just go out with a shotgun approach and put out 5,000 small cells when I only need 500. So it's like the old real estate adage, it's location, location, location. I think that's the second biggest challenge, is determining where to locate the small cell. Where are the customers? What's the RF design from a macro network, such that you can get below the clutter level, you can make sure you're covering the area you need without interfering with the macro. So those are two challenges, I would say, wireline and location.
Okay, good. Francis, do you want to comment on anything before we go to the audience? Or?
Yeah, sure. Just to build on what Greg and Wayne just said. Obviously, I'm talking about the wireline. Greg mentioned the human resources to do the job for these 15,000 times X. The human resources, true, the amount of people that will be required to do that, but also not only the people, but the expertise of those people. There's just not wireless or wireline. These people that will need to build up these sites will need to have both expertise, or three expertise: the power expertise, the climbing expertise, the wireless, the RF, the wireless, the wireline, and so on and so forth. So that is another big challenge, I think, to having the sheer amount of people, but have them competent enough to be able to do that. And the industry will evolve and will bring up smarter ways to do that, smarter either test tools or components to be able to deploy this without requiring a high level of expertise from everybody. The smarter the device is, the dumber can the technician be, if you want. So I guess that's another challenge of the industry, to come up with these smart solutions to facilitate the deployment, this massive deployment.
Okay, good. So I have a lot of other questions that we can fill the time, but why don't we move to the audience here and see if anybody's got any questions on anything that we've discussed or that you'd like to ask the panel about small cell or backhaul. Yes, sir.
Well, the other day, Qualcomm said that they deployed 1,000 small cells in NASCAR for a couple of days. And that they did minimal optimization, they just put them up and they self-optimized. And I wanted to hear a comment about something like that, because you mentioned RF planning.
That's interesting.
Yes.
So
let me just repeat the question a little bit here. So the question was that, well, first of all, that Qualcomm made an announcement that they put up 1,000 small cells for a temporary event, a race, I think you said. And that it basically just set up, self-optimized, and worked for a short period of time, a few days. And the question is, with all this planning and problems that we've been talking about, how is that happening? And what do you guys think about that kind of an application? Wayne?
It'd be difficult to disagree with Qualcomm because they have extremely bright people, right? But so I would say I would have to agree that I mean, there's been a lot of momentum and traction in the wireless industry on SON. It used to be called self-optimized, self-organizing networks. And I believe, and Qualcomm, I believe, is working on some very innovative technology in there. And so I think what they said that they did, I would agree it's very possible to do that, because if you have a heterogeneous set of small cells in an area, you could certainly control them and get them to work together. The challenge is, how do you get those small cells to work with the macro? And the interoperability between whoever each of these small cell vendors are and the macro network. Because if you have a collection of different companies coming and offering small cells, that means they have to interoperate with the different macro networks. And I think that if I look at the technology space, I think the interoperability between macro and micro, as well as even just general interoperability, particularly from a management and OSS perspective, is still in its very early stages. So to the extent that you need to do a very complex small cell deployment that is all small cells, I believe that will work okay. To the extent that you start scattering them 1,000 in 1,000 places, I don't believe we're there yet.
Anyone else have a comment on that, or move on? Thank you very much. Other questions? Other questions? Oh, yes, sir. Thanks for speaking loudly, too. So I think people all heard that. The question is, you know, about the backhaul space and their spec for fiber. Does it have to be diverse? How far, you know, can it be from fiber to justify the build? And really, I would even broaden that question. Is it just fiber that they're looking for, or are there other types of backhaul technologies? You know, we've heard about this line of sight, non-line of sight, a lot of new radio technology coming out that's supposed to help with small cell backhaul. What do you guys see the carriers looking for, or these early deployments in terms of the technology used, and what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of years as it scales? Greg?
Sure. You know, again, I'll go back to 2009, and there were many people in the industry that could not believe that fiber would be pulled to every cell tower, even in a market like Dallas. You know, there were many large companies that never participated in cell site backhaul because they didn't understand the business model and just couldn't believe that fiber would actually cover all their sites. But I'm telling you that especially, you know, Verizon and AT&T are pushing fiber further out and more dense than I certainly ever thought they would. So that's what we're seeing today for the most part. Right now, the early activity is fiber all the way to the small cell. If it's in a CPRI environment, it's dark fiber. It's not a diverse build by any stretch. It's simply a lateral from the utility pole or site of the building back to the nearest macro. But certainly, there's going to be many cases, especially as these numbers explode into the thousands and hundreds of thousands over the next decade, and the cost is not always going to be justified to build fiber. So, you know, we work with, you know, something I didn't mention, but we have several hundred hops of microwave, for instance, in our network today. So we're very familiar with wireless, very comfortable with it. You know, we have partners like, you know, a Fastback Networks or Blink or some of the millimeter wave guys. I just think that a true small cell backhaul company is going to need several tricks in their bag to be able to deliver a comprehensive solution for our customers. And so yeah, now I think on the non-line of sight, near line of sight group, I think that's very early. I think there's still lab trials going on with the various carriers. I think it's very promising, some of the technology that I've seen, but I don't think we're going to see a widespread deployment on that for at least another year or so while they get through the lab trials and some of the field trials and FOAs, et cetera. But I absolutely think wireless will play a huge role, especially as the numbers increase.
Wayne, anything or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think there, like I said before, I think there has to be innovation. But I think, you know, that when you look at wireless, you're always limited by the spectrum and the amount of spectrum. And you usually get more spectrum the higher it is. But that means it doesn't go as far. And then you have to get into the unlicensed versus licensed, and you have operators who've invested tens of billions of dollars in licensed spectrum. They don't always trust the unlicensed. So I think when you play those into it, you know, I think I would agree that it has to be that in order to do wireless, you have to, if you're going to try to use wireless for backhaul, I think it's going to be very selective and very specialized cases. And I think you know, because I don't think it can be a broad brush approach. And I think, and if you look at the standards as well in the LTE relay that's defined in standards, which is sort of the next phase, which is supposed to serve that function in one aspect, there just isn't enough capacity to use a radio link for both, the users and the backhaul. So I think you end up, in order for wireless backhaul to work, I think it has to be very focused environments where you can either get a nice clean line of sight and you can put up the antennas, or if it's non-line of sight, it has to be sort of limited cases, because I don't think it can be broadly deployed. So I would agree.
Thank you. And I'll just comment on that a little bit as well. I think that the initial deployments that have been, put out for bid, and, we've seen some awards in our market as well. Nothing's turned up yet. I think they'll be turning some stuff up this year, though, as was said. I think those are emphasizing a fiber backhaul solution. And, the ones that we've seen, they prefer dark fiber so they can run CPRI over it. And I think the initial deployments are in the main core parts of the markets in a lot of cases where there is a lot of fiber. You get into these venue situations like we were talking about a minute ago. I think the example he was talking about was the Indianapolis 500, and you hear about the stadiums and things like that. Those are kind of a different ball game, I think. But I think that it is basically fiber right now. And one of the things that's interesting is people think, well, fiber is going to cost more capital, and so you're going to have to go with these wireless solutions because you can't justify the build of fiber. But those wireless systems have other costs as well related to them, or even lit fiber. I mean, if I'm going to light my fiber, then I've got to have a place to put my equipment, so I need a demarc or a cabinet or something, and so there's more real estate issues and power issues, and if I'm going to hang a radio, I've got tower rent or building rent or something. So fiber, while it might be more CapEx oriented, doesn't have the operating expense for the backhaul provider that a lit fiber or a wireless solution has. So I think from our perspective, we kind of balance that and say, you're really willing to invest more capital for a fiber solution because you get rid of those operating expenses, and of course you've got the long life asset that's really unlimited from a capacity perspective. So I think just like the macro cell site played out where everyone thought it was going to be all microwave, 7 years ago, and it turned out to be 90% fiber at least. I think that a lot of the deployments in at least the next few years will be fiber-oriented, and people will figure out how the business model works as it converges. So I think we'll have to wait and see how that plays. Any other questions?
Ron, if
Yes.
I may add to that?
Yes, Francis.
A few words. Just to answer to the question, we're working currently with one of the bigger Tier 1 wireless operators, and they've come to us, and different places, they want to do different things. They're looking at leasing at some places, leasing dark fiber. They want to purchase or own dark fiber at other places. Some places they already have some. So it's really on a per region, depending of what's available in their network, what's not, which dark fiber provider is there and which one is not. So it's really a mix and match of all that. And again, like I've said, this particular Tier 1 operator, their expertise is not in fiber. So yes, they want to lease, but they're not too sure what type of fiber they need to lease. So they're turning to folks like us, for instance, to help them, to guide them, to help them to know which fiber is good or not, and what characterization they should do to the fiber. They don't want to lease any type of fiber because they want put some type of service on it. So it's really a mix and match of leasing, owning, purchasing, and then making sure that whatever they lease or they purchase is fit for purpose.
Okay, good. Thank you. Next question? Anybody out there? Okay. How about Wi-Fi offload? Okay. We talk about these small cells and how they're going to be driving, the bandwidth at these particular locations. And, we talked about venues and things like that where you hear a lot of stories about how a lot of these big venues like Super Bowl or something has been outfitted, for the big event. And, the large DAS system that went in, or the citywide small cell system or something. Yet everybody I talk to, can't get a signal or make a phone call, during the events. And then, same thing in the buildings. We're now going to be looking at in-building small cell opportunities as well as, the outdoor space. How do you see Wi-Fi offload playing into that? I mean, is there really a need for the indoor, or is Wi-Fi going to, solve it? What are users going to do in terms of how they get their bandwidth? Any comments on that?
I'm an old radio guy, right? So it's a little bit, anything unlicensed to me is sort of second lower tier, right? But I think, I mean, it has a very valuable place. I think, I think you see Wi-Fi moving from, your home access point to some enterprise to moving to more carrier Wi-Fi. So it's absolutely an important part because all the devices have Wi-Fi. You can get in high dense areas, you can offload, but there's a limit to it, I think. I think there's two issues that I see with Wi-Fi. One is, when they've started doing some of the city Wi-Fi, like where I live up in Virginia, and when I walk outside, their city Wi-Fi, I flip it off because LTE is way faster. I'm within half a mile of the tower, and so I'm not going to deal with. And with Wi-Fi, when you get outside and you start to have more interference, you get 100 kilobits, 200 kilobits, 300 kilobits. How's that for user experience? So I think it's got to be maintained to very specialized. I think in the enterprise, certainly in a home, voice over Wi-Fi is good. I think from enterprise, certainly it's a well-known model. And I think carrier-grade Wi-Fi is an important aspect. But I think you have to be careful with how far you take it. The other thing is I don't think people realize how much interference is on Wi-Fi. When I'm riding the train sometimes, I was up in Long Island a lot recently, and every time I get on the train, I literally could not use my Wi-Fi hotspot on my phone to connect to my laptop because there's so many phones in there generating Wi-Fi. So I had to plug it in. So I think you have to deal with those sorts of issues with Wi-Fi because it's unlicensed. I mean, they're making a lot of progress, but I still think it's a known entity, but I don't actually consider Wi-Fi small cells. I consider them sort of Wi-Fi is an important aspect of enterprise and consumer, but not really the focus of really providing 4G to reaching the 4G vision of throughput, et cetera. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think Verizon and AT&T in particular are going to be bound and determined to keep their LTE network the best product out there. It's going to be interesting for me to see how, as Comcast, basically takes over the world have referenced as Wi-Fi as their wireless network. How comfortable is Verizon and AT&T going to be to continue to offload some of their traffic to the Comcast hotspots? So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But certainly, as much spectrum, as the spectrum crunch continues, I think you're going to still see Wi-Fi be critical in easing that crunch, if you will. But we'll see how these upcoming auctions help ease the crunch, and obviously small cells going to be a big role in creating more capacity down at the user level.
Okay, good. From our side, what we've looked at is a lot of the user studies of how people use their phones. Do they switch off their Wi-Fi, as Wayne was talking about, and use the LTE, or do they turn it on? And it just seems that people have different habits, and even though you would think you would always switch to a free signal, unless you don't like the quality, as Wayne said, people just don't do it. They don't want to have to subscribe, or they don't want to log in, or whatever. And it's almost like 50-50. 50% of the people just stay on their LTE, and 50% go to the Wi-Fi. But what I think is going to be interesting is that as more and more 4G devices are used inside these buildings, inside enterprise buildings, it's going to strain the Wi-Fi backhaul. And so I think there's really a combination opportunity if you're going in and serving a small cell, that you might be able to also provide the backhaul for the Wi-Fi, whether it be enterprise Wi-Fi or the carrier Wi-Fi. And then of course outdoor is a different animal. But it's an interesting thing, and I think we'll see how that plays out. Next question from the audience, anybody? People are starting to mingle out here, I see. So. Last day of the show, last event, eh? So see if we can keep it going for a little bit longer. So how about the capacity? What is the capacity of a small cell?